Hey everyone, in this video we'll show you how to install a high-performance Rockford Fosgate audio system on this Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Welcome back. I'm Eric, and today we're going to install an HD14RGSG-STAGE2 on this Road Glide. The first thing we need to do is make sure that the bike is flashed by an authorized Rockford Fosgate dealer. Now we have a list of these dealers that can flash on our website. The factory radio contains an excessive EQ curve that's preset by the factory. Now this is fine for the factory setup, but with a high performance aftermarket system, we need to get rid of that EQ curve. This will allow you to experience the full potential of our audio system. We'll get started by removing the seat by using a number 2 screwdriver and a 10mm socket to disconnect the battery negative. Okay, now we're ready to remove the fairing. First, we'll install the service cover on our fender. We'll use a 3/16 Allen driver to remove a screw from each marker light. Then a T25 Torx driver to remove 4 bolts on the inner side of the fairing. Next, we'll use a number 2 Phillips and remove 4 screws holding the visor and upper fairing in place. Once we pull this off, we'll disconnect 2 small harnesses. Then we'll use a small nylon pry tool or your finger to pop out the speaker grills from behind. At this step, it's best to have 2 people, one to hold the fairing in position and the other to remove the screws. So to do that, you'll use a 5/32 Allen to remove those last 2 screws that are located near the speakers. Once we pull down the fairing, we'll disconnect any harnesses and remove it. Okay, now we're ready to remove the factory equipment and install our new speakers. The TMS 6.5 speakers included in your kit contain extra grills for street glide and tour pack installs. For our shark nose fairing, we're going to use this wave style grill. We'll start by using a T25 Torx and remove 4 screws that hold the factory speaker. Then disconnect the wiring harness. Now we'll use the same hardware to secure our new speakers in place. The white terminal is positive and the black terminal is negative. Take note when installing, the speaker is keyed for fitment, so align the logo to the bottom. Okay, now that we have that done, we're ready to remove the gas tank. We'll start off by disconnecting the electrical harness and pulling the 2 breather lines in the back. Note that they may be zip tied underneath. Next, we'll disconnect the gas line. Push up on the hose, and while sliding the fitting upward, pull down on the gas line. Once that's done, we'll detach the 2 rubber boots from both sides of the front of the gas tank and use a 1/2-inch socket to remove those 2 bolts. Then we'll go to the back of the gas tank and remove the 2 bolts using the same socket. Before we proceed, we need to remove the headlight. First, disconnect 2 harnesses that attach at the top of the headlight. Then, using a 3/16 Allen wrench, remove 4 screws that hold it in place. Then pull out the headlight and disconnect the harness. Now we're ready to install our power harness. First, cut any zip ties off and unsnap the center harness cover. Then we'll take our harness with the power connector side and run it up to the clutch side of the motorcycle. We'll then use a 9/16 wrench on one side and a 9/16 socket on the other side and unscrew the nut that holds a retaining bracket in place in between the forks. Make sure not to remove the bolt, as this holds the bottom of our fairing in place. We'll route our harness through this bracket and up to the headlight area. We're making good progress, which leads us to installing our T-harness. First, we'll disconnect the main harness from the back of the factory source unit. Push the little catch pin in that locks the harness in place and slide the lever open. Plug that end into the female end of our T-harness. Then plug the male end of our T-harness into the source unit, slide the lever until you hear it click. Now we're ready to prep our amp bracket. First, position the bracket on the heatsink with the Diamond R logo and the flaps facing the same way. Then, use a 2mm Allen wrench to secure 4 flush mount screws into the amp plate labeled 2015 Plus Road Glide. Once that's done, remove the power connector from the amplifier since our power harness already has one installed. Then, position the amplifier with the logo sitting between the flaps on the bracket. Use a 2.5mm Allen and 4 provided screws to secure the amp to the heatsink. Now that we're done with that, we're ready to tune our amplifier and install it. Now you'll need to plug in the inputs and tune before proceeding. We offer this free amp tuning guide that's available in the description of this video and through the kit's product details page at rockfordfosgate.com. Now, prepare the amplifier by taking the harness labeled amp input and plug them into the corresponding front and rear inputs of the amplifier. Then, flip the amplifier assembly over. Now this lip slides in between the radio and the radio bracket when it goes up underneath. Then we'll use a 5/16 wrench and socket to secure the flaps to the underside of the factory radio bracket using the supplied nuts and bolts. Now we're ready to make our final connections at the amplifier. Make sure you have enough slack to make your amplifier and battery connections. Simply plug in the power connector to the amplifier and plug in the blue wire into the empty connector on the top of the brake side. This wire is for the amplifier remote turn-on. Take note that there is likely an empty plug that needs to be removed before making your connection. Then, take the harness labeled amp output and connect them to the corresponding front and rear outputs on the amplifier. Now that we have all that done, we're ready to make our battery connections. We use a 1/2-inch socket to remove 2 screws that hold the engine control module tray in place. We'll disconnect a couple harnesses, flip the ECM up, and make our positive terminal connection with a 10mm socket. Then we'll reconnect our negative cable with our amp ground. Once that's done, we'll put everything back in place. Now that we have that done, we'll clean up our wiring. As you noticed, we have some extra wires on our T-harness, as well as one supplied in the kit. These extra harnesses allow you to use our DSR1 digital signal processor. For more information, download our DSR1 setup guide for Harley-Davidson and keep an eye out for a complete configuration video we'll be releasing in the future. As we were cleaning up the wiring, we went ahead and reinstalled the headlight with a 3/16 Allen to accommodate our T-harness. Now we'll go ahead and finish reassembling the bike. You'll notice there were some additional adapters that came in your kit. The current configuration that you see here supports a rear tour pack speaker option. Now these additional Y adapters allow you to add rear bag lid speakers and aftermarket lowers to the front. There's also extra hardware and bypass plugs that are not used on this motorcycle, but are covered in other videos. Now that we have the bike reassembled, we're ready to test the system. I want to reiterate, before doing this, make sure that the factory radio is flashed. Now we get a lot of questions about the maintenance of the system, and since these speakers are element ready, they can get wet. Just rinse them off and avoid using a pressure washer. As you can see, that install was pretty straightforward. If you prefer a professional do the install for you, we have a network of authorized Rockford Fosgate dealers that can be found on our website. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact our technical support. They can be reached Monday through Friday at 1-800-669-9899 or through live chat at the bottom of our website at rockfordfosgate.com. Until next time, I'm Eric, and we'll see you again soon.